The family sent the ugly daughter as a joke, but she was everything the mountain man ever wanted. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by a horseback messenger who could barely hide the malicious smile on his face. He knew exactly what that sealed envelope represented for the Blackwood family. The whole town knew. When he handed the paper into the hands of Samuel Blackwood, the family patriarch, the man broke the seal with the curiosity of someone expecting news. But he found something much better, a golden opportunity. Hello, my dear friend. This is Jasper Ashwood, your narrator of Mountain Tales. Before we start, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below telling me where you're tuning in from. A big hug to you all, and I hope you enjoy the story. Ezra Stone, the most prosperous mountain man of the neighboring valley, was asking for the hand of one of the Blackwood daughters in marriage. The man had built a wilderness empire from nothing, owned more land than any other proprietor within 100 miles, and his reputation as a man of honor and hard work echoed through all the settlements of the region. He was exactly the type of son-in-law any family would want. The problem was that Ezra had specifically asked for Clara. Samuel called his wife Martha and his two older daughters to the sitting room. Rebecca, the firstborn at 27, sat with the perfect posture she had learned since childhood. Sarah, 25, adjusted her dress with the natural elegance that always accompanied her. Both were the pride of the family, beautiful, educated, obedient, and of marriageable age. Any man of good judgment would choose one of them. "Read this," said Samuel, extending the letter with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Martha took the paper and began reading aloud. As the words left her mouth, the smile on her face grew in an almost disturbing way. The daughters exchanged confused glances until their mother reached the part where Ezra specifically mentioned Clara's name as the desired bride. The silence that followed was broken by Rebecca's cackle. Sarah soon joined her, and within seconds the entire room resonated with laughter that held nothing joyful. It was cruel laughter, laden with a morbid satisfaction that only truly perverse people can feel. "He's asked for Clara," Martha repeated, as if she needed to confirm what she had just read. "The richest and most respected man in the region has asked for our Clara in marriage." "This is perfect," said Samuel with a clap. "Simply perfect." Clara wasn't in the room during that conversation. She was in the back of the house caring for her sick grandmother, as she did every day since the old woman had been bedridden. It was always she who assumed the most difficult responsibilities, the care that no one else wanted to perform, the tasks that dirtied hands or demanded patience. While applying cold compresses to her grandmother's forehead, Clara could hear the laughter coming from the sitting room. It wasn't unusual for her family to laugh at her expense, but there was something different in that laughter, something more cruel, more calculating. She knew that tone well. It was the same one they used when plotting some mischief. The truth about Clara Blackwood was too complex to fit into her family's limited perceptions. At 24, she had become a problem that grew each day, not because she was disobedient or rebellious in the traditional sense, but because she possessed something much more dangerous, an unbreakable sense of justice and the courage to act accordingly. 3 years earlier, when she discovered that the local magistrate was accepting bribes to favor land usurpers, she was the one who gathered evidence and delivered it to the competent authorities. The resulting scandal cost the Blackwood family a series of lucrative deals that depended on judicial corruption. Samuel never forgave her for it. The following year, she exposed a scheme where local merchants artificially increased the prices of basic foods during drought season, taking advantage of the desperation of the poorest families. Again, her intervention cost her family money, as they had silent participation in the inflated profits. The pattern repeated constantly. Clara saw an injustice, investigated on her own, and took measures to correct it regardless of the financial consequences for her family. For the Blackwoods, who had built their fortune navigating the murky waters between legality and convenience, having a daughter with moral conscience was a constant nightmare. But there was another reason they laughed with such satisfaction upon reading Ezra's letter. Clara, in her family's eyes, was physically inadequate for a prestigious marriage. While her sisters possessed the delicate and refined beauty that society expected from respectable ladies, Clara had a more robust appearance, hands calloused from hard work, and a face marked by expressions of determination that her mother considered too masculine. What they couldn't see or refused to see was that Clara's physical strength reflected her strength of character. that her calloused hands told the story of someone who never backed down from honest work, that her determined expressions revealed a soul incapable of accepting injustice passively. And it was exactly that strength of character that had caught Ezra Stone's attention 5 years earlier, during an encounter that would change both their destinies forever. But the Blackwood family was about to discover that underestimating Clara would be the biggest mistake of their lives. However, the story had a side that few knew, and that would transform this supposed cruel joke into the greatest blessing Clara had ever received. 5 years before, the weekly market in Timber Ridge bustled with the typical movement of Saturday mornings. Merchants hawked their prices, children ran between stalls, and the smell of fresh bread mixed with the aroma of spices. Ezra had arrived early to buy supplies for his homestead, but ended up staying longer than planned due to a scene that captured his attention. Near the fabric stall, 3 young ladies conversed with a lace merchant. 2 of them, clearly sisters, examined the materials with the care of those who had been educated to recognize quality. Their dresses were impeccable, their hair arranged to perfection, and their manners revealed the refinement of careful education. They were exactly the type of young ladies any man would expect to find in a respectable family. The 3rd young woman, however, seemed to belong to a completely different world. While her sisters discussed the quality of laces, she looked constantly around, as if searching for something or someone. Her clothes, although clean and well cared for, were clearly simpler. Her hands didn't have the protected delicacy of her sisters. They were hands that knew work. It was then that Ezra heard the shouts that changed everything. On the other side of the square, near the corral where animals were sold, a fight had begun. A short, fat merchant was yelling at a thin, elderly man, accusing him of trying to steal one of his chickens. The old man, clearly frightened, tried to explain that he had only touched the animal to verify if it was healthy before making a purchase offer. "Miserable thief," vociferated the merchant, attracting curious onlookers. "Trying to steal my merchandise right under my nose." The old man, with tears in his eyes, begged for someone to believe his version. His tattered clothing and bare feet betrayed his condition of extreme poverty. It was obvious he barely had money to buy food, much less to steal chickens in broad daylight in a crowded market. Ezra observed the scene with growing indignation. He knew that merchant well, Jake Morrison, a man known for dishonest practices and for taking advantage of the most vulnerable. It was clear he was falsely accusing the old man, probably to put on a show and frighten other poor people who might try to bargain his prices. But before Ezra could intervene, someone stepped forward. The 3rd young woman, the one at the fabric stall, had left her sisters behind and was walking with determination toward the fight. Her steps were firm, her shoulders straight, and there was something in her posture that made people automatically open a path for her. "Stop immediately," she said, positioning herself between the merchant and the old man. Her voice was clear and strong, charged with natural authority that made Jake Morrison stop shouting for a few seconds. "And who are you to give me orders, young lady?" the man growled. But Ezra perceived there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. "I'm someone who has been watching this stall for 10 minutes and has seen exactly what happened," the young woman replied, crossing her arms. "This gentleman touched the chicken for 3 seconds, asked the price, and when you told him it cost double its normal value, he thanked you and walked away. At no moment did he try to take anything." The crowd that had formed began to murmur. Several people confirmed they had also seen the interaction between the merchant and the old man, and that the young woman's version corresponded to what they had witnessed. Jake Morrison realized he was losing control of the situation. "You didn't see anything. You're lying to defend this thief." It was then that the young woman did something that left Ezra completely impressed. She took a small bag from her dress, counted some coins, and held them out to the merchant. "How much does the chicken cost?" she asked calmly. $2, Jake replied, confused by the change in direction of the conversation. "Here are $2, she said, putting the coins in his hand. "Now the chicken is mine." She turned to the old man and handed him the animal. "For you, sir, for your family." The old man was shocked, trying to refuse the gift, but the young woman insisted with such kindness that he finally accepted with tears rolling down his face. "But I can't accept this, miss. You don't know me." "I don't need to know you to know that you're an honest person," she replied, smiling for the first time since Ezra had begun watching her, "and that you have a family waiting for you at home." While the old man walked away clutching the chicken as if it were the world's greatest treasure, Ezra noticed that the young woman's two sisters had approached, and their expressions revealed a mixture of shame and irritation. "Clara, what have you done now?" asked the older one with a voice laden with disapproval. "Just what was right," Clara replied, wiping her hands on her dress. "You've spent the family's money on a stranger. Father will be furious." "Then I'll explain it to him," said Clara with a tranquility that impressed Ezra even more. Her sisters dragged her away, grumbling about her inappropriate behavior and how she always caused trouble. But Ezra continued watching as they walked away, noting how Clara walked with her head held high, showing no regret for what she had done. In that moment, something ignited in Ezra's chest. He had just witnessed something rare, a person who acted according to her conscience, regardless of social or financial consequences, a person who saw others suffering and couldn't simply ignore it. He discreetly asked some acquaintances about the young women's family and discovered they were the Blackwoods. The two older ones were Rebecca and Sarah, known for their beauty and refined education. The younger was Clara, about whom opinions were drastically divided. Some described her as problematic, stubborn, someone who meddled where she wasn't called. Others, especially the simpler folk, spoke of her with admiration and gratitude, telling stories of small acts of kindness she had performed without expecting anything in return. Ezra knew which version was true, and from that day, Clara Blackwood never left his thoughts. But what he didn't imagine was that 5 years later, destiny would give him the opportunity to better know that extraordinary woman, and that her parents, considering her a burden, were about to commit the most beneficial mistake of their lives. The family conspiracy was taking shape with the precision of a military plan. Samuel paced back and forth, hands clasped behind his back, while a cruel smile spread across his face. Martha remained seated, rereading the letter for the third time, as if she needed to confirm she wasn't dreaming about this opportunity. "Perfect. 5 years," Samuel murmured, stopping suddenly, "dealing with the problems this girl causes us. And now, a man appears asking specifically for her." Rebecca adjusted a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Father, do you think he knows about the incidents?" "Impossible," Martha replied with conviction. "Ezra Stone lives 2 valleys away. If he knew about her reputation, he would never make this request." Sarah got up and went to the window, watching Clara hanging clothes on the yard's clothesline. "Look at her, always working, always serious. No man around here has wanted to marry her. It's obvious this mountain man doesn't know what he's getting into, and that's exactly what makes this situation so perfect," said Samuel, hitting the table with his fist in satisfaction. "He's expecting to receive a proper wife, educated, submissive. Imagine his surprise when he discovers he's chosen our Clara." The evil of the plan was simple and devastating. They would respond to Ezra's letter, confirming the marriage, but wouldn't mention anything about Clara's true personality. They would let the man discover for himself that he had asked for the hand of the family's most problematic daughter. "When he discovers the type of woman she really is," Samuel continued, "it will be too late. The wedding will have already taken place, and she'll be his problem, not ours." Martha folded the letter carefully. "And the best part of all is that she'll be far enough away not to interfere anymore in our business. 2 valleys away is a blessing." What they didn't know was that outside the room, Clara had stopped hanging clothes and was leaning against the wall, listening to every word of the conversation. Her heart beat so loudly she feared someone might hear it. Her family's words echoed in her mind like stones thrown at a calm surface. His problem, not ours. Too late, a blessing. That's how they saw her, as a burden that should be dispatched to the first man willing to accept her. Clara closed her eyes and rested her forehead against the cold wood of the wall. For 24 years, she had tried to earn her family's love and respect. She had cared for her sick grandmother, assumed the household's most difficult tasks, tried to be an obedient daughter, but none of that mattered, because she had committed the unforgivable crime of having a conscience. Every time she had exposed an injustice, every time she had defended someone defenseless, every time she had refused to participate in her family's dubious schemes, she had dug her own social grave a little deeper. And now, finally, they had found a way to permanently get rid of her. The tears she had been holding back for years finally began rolling down her face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of painful liberation. She finally understood that she would never be loved by these people, no matter what she did. For them, she would always be the family defect, the daughter born wrong. But while wiping the tears with the back of her hand, Clara made a decision that would change everything. If they wanted to get rid of her so desperately, if they considered sending her to a stranger adequate revenge, then she would turn it into a victory. She wouldn't go to that wedding as a victim. She would go as a woman who finally understood her own worth, regardless of her family's opinion. If Ezra Stone discovered who she really was and decided to reject her, at least she would have the dignity of not having lied about her nature. Inside the room, the Blackwoods continued planning their supposed revenge. "We'll respond today," said Samuel. "We'll confirm the wedding and say that Clara is anxious to meet her future husband." "And regarding the dowry?" asked Martha. "The minimum possible. After all, we're doing her a favor, aren't we?" Samuel laughed at his own cruel joke. Rebecca and Sarah exchanged complicit glances. For years they had silently competed to see who would marry first and best. The idea that their younger sister, whom they had always considered inferior, would marry before them was almost unbearable, but the fact that it was a wedding destined for failure relieved the situation. "She has no idea what awaits her," Sarah murmured with satisfaction. "And when the wedding becomes a disaster, as it surely will," Rebecca added, "at least it won't be our responsibility to deal with the consequences." What none of them could imagine was that Clara had qualities that transcended their limited perceptions, that her honesty, her courage, and her compassion were exactly the treasures some men search for their entire lives without finding. And that Ezra Stone wasn't an ordinary man, but someone wise enough to recognize true value when he saw it. Clara returned to the clothesline and finished hanging the clothes with mechanical movements. Her hands trembled slightly, but her resolution was firm. In a few weeks she would leave that house forever. She would leave behind the people who had never been able to love her for who she was. And maybe, just maybe, she would find someone who could. The afternoon passed slowly, with Clara absorbed in her thoughts while attending to household chores. When dinner time arrived, she sat at the table as always, but this time she observed her family with different eyes. She saw the falseness in their smiles, the cruelty disguised as concern, the morbid satisfaction they tried to hide. "Clara," said Samuel with an artificially caring voice, "we have wonderful news for you." She looked at him with a neutral expression, knowing exactly what would come next. "We've received a marriage proposal. A prosperous homesteader from the neighboring valley has asked for your hand." Clara nodded slowly. "And you've accepted?" "Naturally. It's an excellent opportunity for you," said Martha, barely able to hide her satisfaction. "When will the wedding be?" "In a few weeks. You'll depart next Monday to meet your future husband." Clara continued eating in silence, processing the information. 5 days. In 5 days, her life would change completely. "You don't seem enthusiastic," observed Rebecca with false concern. "I'm just processing it," Clara replied. "It's a big change." "Of course it is," said Samuel, "but I'm sure you'll adapt adequately." The word adequately carried all the weight of their expectations. They expected her to fail, to cause problems, to confirm all their negative perceptions about her. But Clara had decided to surprise them in a way they would never expect. While the Blackwood family plotted their supposed revenge, 40 miles away, Ezra Stone was living a completely different dilemma. Sitting on his porch at sunset, watching cattle graze in the green fields of his property, he held a blank sheet of paper in his hands for more than an hour, trying to find adequate words to write to Clara's family. It wasn't the first time he had considered marriage. At 33, Ezra had built more than many men achieve in a lifetime. His homestead prospered, his business was respected, and he had sufficient resources to support a large family. But whenever he thought about marriage, the image that came to mind wasn't that of any beautiful and well-educated woman from the region. It was always Clara. For 5 years, he had carried the memory of that afternoon at the market, like a man carries a burning flame in his chest. Not a week had passed without him thinking about her, without wondering what kind of woman she had become, whether she still possessed that same brave spirit that had so impressed him. Ezra had made some discreet investigations about the Blackwood family over the years. He learned about Samuel's dubious business dealings, about Rebecca and Sarah's attempts to marry influential men, and above all, about Clara's constant interference in local corruption schemes. For any other man, that information would be reason to avoid the family completely. For Ezra, it was confirmation that Clara was exactly who he imagined she was, an upright woman living in a family that didn't understand or value her integrity. He knew that asking specifically for Clara would raise suspicions, Social logic dictated that he should choose one of the older sisters, more beautiful, more suitable for a man of his position. But Ezra had learned to distrust social logic when it conflicted with his heart's impulses. The truth was that he didn't want a decorative wife. He didn't want someone who would simply agree with him, who would only keep the house tidy and the children clean. Ezra wanted a companion in the deepest sense of the word, someone with whom he could share not only bed and table, but also values, dreams, concerns about what was right and wrong in the world. And Clara, from what he had observed and discovered, was the only woman he knew who possessed those qualities. Finally, he dipped his pen in the inkwell and began to write. His words were carefully chosen, respectful but direct. He introduced himself properly, mentioned his property and financial situation, and then made the request he knew would surprise the family. He wished to ask for Clara Blackwood's hand in marriage. He didn't mention his true reasons. He didn't speak of the market, of his admiration for her courage, of the 5 years he had spent thinking about her. That would be inappropriate in formal correspondence. But he wrote with sincerity about his desire to find a companion who valued honesty and integrity as much as he did. When he finished the letter, Ezra reread it. He knew he was taking an enormous risk. Clara might have changed completely in the last 5 years. She might have become bitter or resentful due to conflicts with her family. She might even reject him completely. But something inside him insisted it was worth trying. The next morning, he personally took the letter to the post office, delivering it personally to the clerk and paying extra to ensure it would quickly reach its destination. Then he returned home and tried to keep busy with homestead tasks, but his thoughts constantly returned to that letter, traveling the dusty road toward Clara's town. 3 days later, the response arrived. Ezra immediately recognized the masculine handwriting on the envelope, obviously written by Samuel Blackwood as was appropriate, but when he opened it and read the contents, something in the urgency of the acceptance left him slightly uncomfortable. The letter was cordial, but too brief. Samuel accepted the request with enthusiasm, confirmed that Clara was anxious to meet her future husband, and suggested he travel the following Monday so they could meet before the wedding. Ezra frowned. There was something in the letter's tone that didn't sound entirely natural. It was almost as if the family was too anxious to close the deal, as if they wanted to dispatch Clara as quickly as possible. He wondered if there was something he didn't know about her, some health problem perhaps, or some recent scandal the family wanted to hide. But then he remembered the woman he had seen defend a stranger in the market and decided he would face whatever problems arose. On Monday, Clara would arrive, and then he would finally discover if 5 years of hope had been worth it. What Ezra couldn't imagine was that Clara would also arrive with her own fears and hopes, that she had heard her family plan to use the wedding as a form of revenge against him, and that she had made the brave decision to be completely honest about who she was, regardless of consequences. 2 lonely hearts were about to meet, both carrying secrets that could transform this matrimonial arrangement into something much deeper and truer than anyone dared to hope. But before that happened, Clara would have to face the most difficult journey of her life, leaving behind the only family she knew, however cruel it was, and departing toward the unknown with only the hope that maybe someone could finally see her for who she really was. Monday arrived with a grey sky that seemed to perfectly reflect the mood in the Blackwood house. Clara woke before dawn, as she had done for the last 5 days, unable to sleep deeply, knowing her life was about to change completely. She had spent the previous week in silent preparation. She packed her few possessions in a small, worn trunk that had belonged to her grandmother. She didn't have many dresses. Her family had never invested in her wardrobe as they did with her sisters, but she made sure each garment was clean and well pressed. More important than clothing, Clara had spent hours reflecting on how she would present herself to Ezra Stone. She had made the decision to be completely honest about who she was, but that didn't mean she didn't feel fear. What if he rejected her? What if after truly knowing her, he decided her family was right, that she was too problematic? But every time those thoughts assaulted her, Clara remembered something fundamental. She would rather be rejected for being herself than be accepted for a lie. She had lived 24 years trying to conform to her family's expectations, and that had only made her more unhappy. She wouldn't make the same mistake with a husband. Downstairs, breakfast was served in silence. Samuel and Martha exchanged satisfied glances, while Rebecca and Sarah could barely hide their joy at finally seeing Clara depart. The only person who seemed genuinely sad was grandmother, who gripped Clara's hand with trembling fingers. "You'll be happy, my child," the old woman whispered, her words laden with hope that Clara didn't feel in the other family members. "You have a good heart. That always finds its place in the world." Clara kissed her grandmother's forehead, feeling tears sting her eyes. She was the only person in that house she would truly miss. The wagon that would take Clara to Ezra's homestead arrived punctually at 8 in the morning. The driver, a middle-aged man with a sympathetic expression, helped her load the trunk and opened the door with a courteous bow. "Have a good journey, my daughter," said Samuel, kissing her cheek with a display of affection Clara knew was purely theatrical. "We hope you'll be very happy in your new life." "Write to us," added Martha, though her tone suggested she neither expected nor truly desired correspondence. Rebecca and Sarah waved from the porch, their smiles too bright to be sincere. Clara climbed into the wagon without looking back, knowing that if she did, she might lose the courage to leave. The journey to Ezra's homestead would last approximately 4 hours, passing through dirt roads that serpentined between hills and cultivated fields. Clara used the time to organize her thoughts and mentally prepare for the encounter that would define her future. She had thought much about what she knew of Ezra Stone. From comments she had heard over the years, he was known as a fair, hard-working and prosperous man. He had never married, which at 33 was considered unusual but not necessarily problematic. Some men preferred to wait until completely established before forming a family. What most intrigued Clara was the fact that he had asked specifically for her. Her sisters were objectively more beautiful, better educated in feminine arts, more suitable for a prestigious marriage. Why would a successful man choose precisely the daughter her own family considered problematic? There were two possibilities. Either he didn't know about her reputation and would receive an unpleasant surprise when he got to know her better, or he knew exactly who she was and had his own reasons for wanting her as a wife. Clara couldn't decide which of the two options made her more nervous. As the wagon approached its destination, the landscape began to change. Properties became larger and better maintained, fields more organized, cattle visibly healthier. It was obvious they were entering a region of real prosperity, not the questionable prosperity that characterized her family's business. Finally, the driver announced they had arrived at the Stone homestead. Clara looked through the wagon window and felt her breath catch for a moment. The property was impressive, not ostentatious, but solid and well-planned. The main house was large enough to shelter a numerous family, built of noble wood, with a wide porch that invited rest. Stables and barns were functionally organized, and everywhere there were signs that this place was administered by someone who truly understood agriculture. But what most caught Clara's attention was the man who emerged from the house to receive her. Ezra Stone was taller than she remembered, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of physical work. His dark hair had some gray threads at the temples, and his face showed the marks of someone who spent much time in the sun. But it was his eyes that made her recognize him immediately. The same attentive and intelligent eyes that had observed her in the market 5 years before. He had watched her that day. She was certain of it now. The way he looked at her while the driver helped her down from the wagon wasn't the look of a man seeing a stranger for the first time. It was the look of someone who recognized her. "Miss Clara," he said, approaching with measured steps. His voice was deep and calm, charged with gentleness that made something stir in her chest. "Welcome to Stone Homestead." "Mr. Ezra," she replied, making a small curtsy. "Thank you for receiving me." He took her trunk from the driver's hands and gestured toward the house. "You must be tired from the journey. How about we go inside to talk more comfortably?" While they walked side by side toward the porch, Clara felt a strange mixture of nervousness and relief. There was something in Ezra's presence that calmed her. He didn't seem like the type of man who would make hasty judgments or expect her to be someone she wasn't. But she still didn't know that Ezra had spent 5 years imagining exactly this moment, that he had asked her in marriage not despite her reputation, but because of it, and that her family, thinking they were playing a cruel joke on him, had just fulfilled the deepest dream of two lonely hearts. The conversation that was about to take place would change everything, and this time Clara would discover what it was like to be truly seen and valued by someone. But first, she would have to find the courage to be completely honest about who she really was, and pray that this honesty would be received with the understanding she had never found in her own family. Ezra's sitting room was simple but welcoming. Solid wood furniture, some books scattered on a side table, and a fireplace that radiated gentle warmth. Clara sat in a comfortable chair, trying to hide the nervousness growing in her chest. Ezra served coffee in delicate porcelain cups, a touch of refinement she hadn't expected. "How was your journey?" he asked, sitting in the chair beside hers. There was respectful distance between them, but Clara noticed he watched her attentively, as if trying to decipher something in her expression. "Peaceful, thank you," she replied, holding the cup between her hands. The warmth of the porcelain helped keep her hands occupied. "Your property is beautiful. It must have taken years to build all this." 10 years of constant work," said Ezra with discreet pride. "I bought the land when it was nothing more than abandoned pasture. Each corral, each fence, each plantation was planned and built little by little." Clara nodded, impressed. She knew the value of hard work and could recognize results when she saw them. "It must be gratifying to see all this grow with your own hands." "It is," he agreed. "But a property this size calls for a family. An empty house, no matter how large, is still just an empty house." There was a moment of silence while both drank their coffee. Clara knew the time had come for serious conversations, for questions that would define whether this encounter would lead to a wedding or a polite farewell. "Mr. Ezra," she began, setting the cup back on the saucer, "I need to ask you a direct question." "Please," he said, leaning slightly forward. "Why did you ask for me specifically? My sisters are more beautiful, better educated in the arts expected of a wife. Any sensible man would choose one of them." Ezra remained silent for a long moment, studying her face. Clara saw something change in his expression, that he was making a decision. "May I be equally direct?" he asked. "Please. Because I saw you in a market 5 years ago. I saw what you did for an old man who was being falsely accused of theft. I saw how you spent your own money to buy a chicken and give it away without expecting anything in return." Clara felt blood rise to her face. "You were there." "I was. And I spent 5 years thinking about the woman who had the courage to do what was right, even knowing her family would disapprove." Ezra leaned even closer. "Miss Clara, I don't want a pretty and silent wife. I want a companion who has the moral strength to do what's right, even when it's difficult." His words hit Clara like lightning. All her life her family had criticized her exactly for the qualities Ezra was praising. It was as if the world had turned upside down. "But you should know," she said, finding courage to continue being honest, "that my family considers me problematic. They sent me here because they want to get rid of me, not because they believe I would be a good wife for you." "I suspected as much," Ezra replied calmly. "The speed with which they accepted my request was revealing. And even knowing that, you still want to marry me." Ezra stood and walked to the window, looking at fields that extended beyond the house. "May I tell you something about myself?" "Of course." "I could have married any of a dozen women in the last 10 years. All beautiful, all from respectable families, all would have been sensible choices." He turned to look at her. "But every time I considered marriage, I thought of that girl from the market who defended a stranger, and no other woman could compare to that memory." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "You don't really know me. I might disappoint you, or you might be exactly what my life needs," he said, returning to sit. "Clara, may I make you a proposal?" "What kind of proposal?" "That we spend a few weeks truly getting to know each other, without pressure, without impossible expectations. If at the end of that time we discover we're compatible, we'll marry. If not, I'll help you find a suitable situation, whether returning to your family or finding another arrangement that makes you happy." The generosity of the offer left Clara speechless. "You would do that even if I decided not to marry you?" "I would, because a woman with your character deserves to have choices in life, not just be pushed from one unhappy situation to another." For the first time in years, Clara felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Hope that perhaps there existed a place in the world where she could be accepted exactly as she was. "And if I accept this proposal," she said slowly, "do you promise I can be completely honest about who I am, even if some things about me make you uncomfortable?" "Especially then," Ezra replied. "Lies and appearances are a terrible foundation for any relationship, much less for a marriage." Clara took a deep breath. "Then I accept your proposal, but with one condition." "Which?" "That you also be completely honest with me about your expectations, your fears, your dreams. If we're going to truly know each other, it has to work both ways." Ezra smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him since she arrived. "Deal." They shook hands to seal the agreement, and Clara felt an electric current run through her arm at contact with him. There was something about this man that made her feel safe and challenged at the same time, as if he could handle her strength without trying to diminish it. "So," said Ezra, "how about we start with a tour of the property? I want to show you everything, and I want to hear your honest opinions about what you see." Clara stood feeling lighter than she had in years. "I'd love to, but I should warn you, I have opinions about many things." "Perfect," he said, offering her his arm. "I was counting on it." As they left the house together, Clara couldn't help thinking about the irony of the situation. Her family had tried to get rid of her, sending her to a man who supposedly would be deceived about her true nature. Instead, she had found someone who wanted her precisely for being who she was. But there was still much to discover about Ezra Stone, and Clara was determined to use those weeks to find out if the man who had impressed her in the market could be the companion she had always dreamed of finding. And maybe, just maybe, her family had just given her the most precious gift of her life, even without meaning to. The following weeks passed like a dream for Clara. Each morning brought new discoveries about life on the homestead, about Ezra, and surprisingly, about herself. For the first time in her life, she found herself in an environment where her opinions were not only tolerated, but actively solicited. Ezra kept his promise of total honesty. During their walks around the property, he shared his plans to expand cattle raising, his dreams of building a school for workers' children, and his concerns about droughts that occasionally devastated the region. Clara discovered she possessed valuable ideas about rural management, ideas born from her natural capacity for observation and her concern for people's welfare. "What if we built a system of connected cisterns?" she suggested one afternoon while watching workers carry water for the cattle. "That way, even during drought, we'd have sufficient reserves." Ezra stopped walking and looked at her with admiration. "That's brilliant. Why didn't I think of that before?" "Because you think like a man who has always had resources," Clara replied honestly. "I think like someone who grew up seeing people suffer from lack of planning." It was this type of exchange that made Ezra's heart beat faster. Clara not only possessed an admirable sense of justice, but also practical intelligence that perfectly complemented his own abilities. She saw angles he overlooked, questioned decisions he made automatically, always with the goal of improving life for people around them. But it wasn't only practical aspects of life that brought them closer. During long conversations at day's end, sitting on the porch watching sunset, they discovered emotional compatibility that surprised them both. "Tell me about your family," Ezra asked one of those afternoons. Clara hesitated for a moment, but then decided to maintain her promise of total honesty. "They see me as a mistake, as someone born with defects they can't correct." "What kind of defects?" "I worry too much about strangers. I ask uncomfortable questions. I can't pretend not to see injustices." Clara looked at her hands. "My mother always said a lady should be like a beautiful doll, seen but not heard." Ezra remained silent for a long moment. "And what do you think about that?" "I think a life without purpose isn't worth living. If you have the capacity to help someone or improve a situation, how can you simply ignore it?" "Exactly," said Ezra with conviction. "Clara, do you know what the difference is between you and your sisters? They are beautiful, decorative. You are transformative." He turned to look at her directly. "Your sisters can beautify a room, but you can change a life, transform a community. That's infinitely more valuable." His words touched something deep in Clara's soul. For the first time, someone not only accepted her most problematic characteristics, but saw them as virtues. As days passed, attraction between them grew naturally and intensely. It wasn't just mutual respect or intellectual compatibility. There was physical chemistry that manifested in prolonged glances, casual touches that seemed to last longer than necessary, in the way Clara's heart accelerated when Ezra smiled at her. One night, while walking through the garden under starlight, Ezra suddenly stopped. "Clara, I need to tell you something." "What?" "I didn't plan for this to happen so quickly, but..." He took a deep breath. "I'm falling in love with you. Not with the idea of you I carried in my head for 5 years, but with the real woman you are." Clara's heart felt like it would explode in her chest. "Ezra, I know we promised only to get to know each other without pressure, and I maintain that promise. If you need more time or if you decide you don't feel the same..." "I feel the same," she interrupted, her voice coming out in a whisper. "I'm also falling in love with your kindness, your honesty, The way you make me feel I can be myself without fear." Ezra approached, lifting his hand to gently touch her face. "May I kiss you?" In response, Clara stood on tiptoes, meeting his lips with hers. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but then deepened with intensity that made them both tremble. When they separated, they remained embraced under the stars, feeling that something fundamental had changed between them. They were no longer two strangers testing a possibility. They were two people who had found something rare and precious in each other. "Marry me," Ezra whispered against her hair. "Not because it was an arrangement by our families, but because I can't imagine my life without you." "Yes," Clara replied without hesitation. "Yes, I want to marry you." That night, lying in the room Ezra had prepared for her, Clara reflected on the incredible journey her life had taken in 3 weeks. Before, she was the rejected daughter of a family that considered her a burden. Now she was the chosen bride of a man who loved her exactly for being who she was. Her family had tried to use the wedding as cruel revenge, a way to dispatch their problematic daughter to an innocent man. Instead, they had inadvertently created the perfect union between two souls that complemented each other. Clara smiled in the darkness, thinking about the delicious irony of the situation. Her parents probably were celebrating, believing they had played the perfect joke on Ezra Stone. They barely knew they had just fulfilled the deepest dreams of two people who were destined to meet. The wedding would be the following week, and Clara knew with absolute certainty it would be the beginning of the life she had always dreamed of having, but never dared hope would be possible. For the first time in 24 years, she fell asleep completely happy. But the real surprise would come when her family discovered that the wedding they planned as revenge had become the greatest love story the region had ever witnessed. Clara and Ezra's wedding took place on a sunny Saturday morning in the small church of Pine Valley. The ceremony was simple but charged with emotion that moved everyone present. Clara wore a dress Ezra had specially made for her, not ostentatious, but elegant, in a shade of blue that enhanced her eyes. The Blackwood family didn't attend. They sent only a cold letter, congratulating the couple and wishing them good luck in their marriage. Clara read the correspondence on the wedding morning and threw it into the fireplace, showing no emotion. That family belonged to her past. Her new life was beginning. Ezra, on the other hand, had invited all the homestead workers and their families, friends from other properties, and even some humble people from town whom Clara had helped over the years. The church was filled with people who truly loved them and desired their happiness. During the ceremony, when Ezra took Clara's hands and promised to love, protect, and respect her for life, she saw tears of emotion in his eyes. And when she made her promises to be his loyal companion, honest counselor, and best friend forever, her voice came out firm and clear, without hesitation. They were no longer two strangers united by convenience. They were two people deeply in love who had consciously chosen to build a life together. The celebration after the wedding was memorable. Guests danced late into the night, ate abundant food prepared by women of the region, and celebrated a union everyone could see was based on true love. Clara had never felt so surrounded by affection and acceptance. But the real surprise came 3 months later, when Samuel Blackwood appeared unexpectedly at the homestead. Clara was in the garden picking flowers to decorate the dinner table when she saw the familiar carriage coming up the road. Her first impulse was panic. What would her family want now? But then she remembered she was no longer the rejected and vulnerable daughter. She was Clara Stone, mistress of her own house, married to a man who respected her, living the life she had chosen. Ezra came out of the house upon hearing the carriage noise, naturally positioning himself beside his wife. His presence was a silent reminder that Clara was no longer alone to face her family. Samuel descended from the carriage with an expression Clara had never seen before, a mixture of discomfort and something that seemed almost like respect. "Clara," he said, removing his hat. Ezra nodded toward her husband with courtesy that seemed forced. "Father," Clara replied coolly. "What brings you here?" Samuel looked around the property, clearly impressed with what he saw. The homestead had prospered even more in recent months, with improvements that reflected the perfect partnership between Ezra and Clara. New corrals, intelligent irrigation systems, a small but functional school for workers' children. Everything was evidence of administration that combined prosperity with social responsibility. "I've come to speak about some business," Samuel finally said. "What kind of business?" asked Ezra. his arm protectively around Clara's waist. Samuel took a deep breath as if about to swallow something bitter. Perhaps you've heard about the troubles that have arisen in our region. Clara hadn't heard, but could imagine. What kind of troubles? The magistrate has been arrested for corruption. Several families are being investigated for their participation in land appropriation schemes. Our family? Clara asked. Samuel paused, clearly uncomfortable. Our family might face some financial difficulties. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Clara. The same illegal activities she had tried to expose years earlier were finally being investigated by real authorities. If her family had listened to her warnings at the time, they might have avoided the scandal. And what does that have to do with us? Asked Ezra. Samuel looked directly at Clara. We were thinking you might intercede for us, perhaps use your influence with your husband to help us financially during this difficult period. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara looked at the man who had spent 24 years making her feel inadequate, who had sent her away as if it were punishment for Ezra, who had celebrated when he thought he was getting rid of her forever. Father, she finally said, her voice calm but firm, all my life you told me I was a problem, that my opinions were inconvenient, that my conscience was a defect. You sent me here believing it was revenge against my husband. Samuel lowered his eyes, clearly uncomfortable. But now that you need help, suddenly I'm someone whose influence is worth something. Clara, you're our daughter. No, she interrupted. A daughter is loved, protected, valued. I was a burden you finally managed to get rid of. The difference is you thought you were punishing me, but actually gave me the greatest gift of my life. Ezra gently squeezed Clara's hand, a gesture of silent support. I won't help you financially, she continued. Not because I lack compassion, but because helping you would facilitate continuation of the same corrupt practices I always criticized. You made your choices. Now live with the consequences. Samuel turned red with anger. After everything we did for you, what did you do for me? Asked Clara, her voice rising slightly. Make me feel inadequate for having a conscience. Punish me for defending what's right, or send me away thinking you were harming an innocent man. You raised me, fed me, educated me. You did the minimum the law requires of parents, but never loved me for who I am. Ezra has known me only a few months and values me more than you in an entire lifetime. Samuel looked at Ezra with rage. And you're going to allow your wife to speak like that to her own father? Ezra smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Blackwood, my wife is free to express her opinions. In fact, it was precisely for that reason I married her, for the courage you always try to destroy. Realizing he wouldn't get what he wanted, Samuel returned to the carriage angrily. Before leaving, he shouted one last offense. You'll regret this. Clara and Ezra stood hand in hand, watching the carriage disappear. When it vanished from sight, Clara turned to her husband. Did I do the right thing? You did the only thing you could do, being who you are, he replied, kissing her forehead, and I love you even more for it. That night, while dining in the dining room that was now truly theirs, Clara reflected on the extraordinary journey she had traveled. The family that tried to get rid of her as if she were garbage now begged for her help. The man who supposedly would be victim of a cruel joke had become her greatest love and support. You know what's the funniest thing about all this? She told Ezra. What? My parents really believed they were playing a joke on you, that they were sending you the defective daughter to ruin your life. Ezra laughed, a rich and warm sound that filled the room. They'll never understand they gave me exactly the treasure I was searching for my whole life. Clara smiled, feeling her heart fill with gratitude. Sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as the worst curses. And sometimes, said Ezra, taking her hand across the table, people who try to hurt us end up directing us toward our true destiny. They finished dinner in peace, knowing they had built something beautiful and solid together, a partnership based on mutual respect, true love, and shared values. Clara would never again be the rejected daughter. She was now the beloved wife, the respected counselor, the woman who had found her place in the world beside someone who saw her exactly as she was, perfect in her imperfection, valuable in her authenticity, loved in her totality. And so ends another story that makes us reflect on the value of being authentic. If you enjoyed it and want to continue receiving stories like this, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Tell me here in the comments, do you like this story? Thank you so much for being here and being part of this special community that grows every day. You are very important to this channel.